Stories of Futures Past presents 5 stories featuring murder. Pythias by Frederik Pohl. The First Man on the Moon by Alfred Coppel. Sleigh Ride by Winston K. Marks. Wall of Crystal, Eye of Night by Algis Budrys. One Martian Afternoon by Tom Leahy. Pythias by Frederik Pohl. Originally published in Galaxy, February 1955. Narrated by Tom Trussel. I am sitting on the edge of what passes for a bed. It is made of loosely woven strips of steel, and there is no mattress, only an extra blanket of thin olive drab. It isn't comfortable, but of course they expect to make me still more uncomfortable. They expect to take me out of this precinct jail to the district prison and eventually to the death house. Sure, there will be a trial first, but that is only a formality. Not only did they catch me with a smoking gun in my hand and Connaught bubbling to death through the hole in his throat, but I admitted it. I, knowing what I was doing, with, as they say, malice aforethought, deliberately shot to death Lawrence Connaught. They execute murderers, so they mean to execute me. Especially because Lawrence Connaught had saved my life. Well, there are extenuating circumstances. I do not think they would convince a jury. Connaught and I were close friends for years. We lost touch during the war. We met again in Washington, a few years after the war was over. We had, to some extent, grown apart. He had become a man with a mission. He was working very hard on something, and he did not choose to discuss his work, and there was nothing else in his life on which to form a basis for communication. And, well, I had my own life too. It wasn't scientific research in my case. I flunked out of med school, while he went on. I'm not ashamed of it. It is nothing to be ashamed of. I simply was not able to cope with the messy business of carving corpses. I didn't like it. I didn't want to do it, and when I was forced to do it, I did it badly. So, I left. Thus, I have no string of degrees, but you don't need them in order to be a Senate guard. Does that sound like a terribly impressive career to you? Of course not, but I liked it. The senators are relaxed and friendly when the guards are around, and you learn wonderful things about what goes on behind the scenes of government. And a Senate guard is in a position to do favors for newspapermen who find a lead to a story useful, for government officials who sometimes base a whole campaign on one careless, repeated remark, and for just about anyone who would like to be in the visitors' gallery during a hot debate. Larry Connaught, for instance. I ran into him on the street one day, and we chatted for a moment, and he asked if it was possible to get him in to see the upcoming foreign relations debate. It was. I called him the next day and told him I had arranged for a pass. And he was there, watching eagerly with his moist little eyes, when the secretary got up to speak, and there was that sudden unexpected yell, and the handful of Central American fanatics dragged out their weapons and began trying to change American policy with gunpowder. You remember the story, I suppose. There were only 3 of them, 2 with guns, 1 with a hand grenade. The pistol men managed to wound 2 senators and a guard. I was right there, talking to Connaught. I spotted the little fellow with a hand grenade and tackled him. I knocked him down, but the grenade went flying, pin pulled, seconds ticking away. I lunged for it. Larry Connaught was ahead of me. The newspaper stories made heroes out of both of us. They said it was miraculous that Larry, who had fallen right on top of the grenade, had managed to get it away from himself and so placed that when it exploded, no one was hurt. For it did go off, and the flying steel touched nobody. The papers mentioned that Larry had been knocked unconscious by the blast. He was unconscious all right. He didn't come to for 6 hours, and when he woke up, he spent the next whole day in a stupor. I called on him the next night. He was glad to see me. "That was a close one, Dick," he said. "Take me back to Tarawa." I said, "I guess you saved my life, Larry." "Nonsense, Dick. I just jumped. Lucky, that's all." "The papers said you were terrific. They said you'd moved so fast nobody could see exactly what happened." He made a deprecating gesture, but his wet little eyes were wary. "Nobody was really watching, I suppose." "I was watching," I told him flatly. He looked at me silently for a moment. "I was between you and the grenade," I said. "You didn't go past me, over me, or through me, but you were on top of the grenade." He started to shake his head. I said, "Also, Larry, you fell on the grenade. It exploded underneath you. I know because I was almost on top of you, and it blew you clear off the floor of the gallery. Did you have a bulletproof vest on?" He cleared his throat. "Well, as a matter of—" "Cut it out, Larry. What's the answer?" He took off his glasses and rubbed his watery eyes. He grumbled. "Don't you read the papers? It went off a yard away." "Larry," I said gently, "I was there." He slumped back in his chair, staring at me. Larry Connaught was a small man, but he never looked smaller than he did in that big chair, looking at me, though I were Mr. Nemesis himself. Then he laughed. He surprised me. He sounded almost happy. He said, "Well, hell, Dick, I had to tell somebody about it sooner or later. Why not you?" I can't tell you all of what he said. I'll tell most of it, but not the part that matters. I'll never tell that part to anybody. Larry said, "I should have known you'd remember." He smiled at me ruefully, affectionately. "Those bull sessions in the cafeterias, eh? Talking all night about everything. But you remembered. You claimed that the human mind possessed powers of psychokinesis." I said, "You argued that just by the mind, without moving a finger or using a machine, a man could move his body anywhere, instantly. You said that nothing was impossible to the mind." I felt like an absolute fool saying those things. They were ridiculous notions. Imagine a man thinking himself from one place to another. But I had been on that gallery. I licked my lips and looked to Larry Connaught for confirmation. "I was all wet," Larry laughed. "Imagine!" I suppose I showed surprise, because he patted my shoulder. He said, becoming sober, "Sure, Dick, you're wrong, but you're right all the same. The mind alone can't do anything of the sort. That was just a silly kid notion. But," he went on, "but there are, well, techniques, linking the mind to physical forces, simple physical forces that we all use every day, that can do it all. Everything. Everything I ever thought of, and things I haven't found out yet. Fly across the ocean? In a second, Dick. Wall off an exploding bomb? Easily. You saw me do it. Oh, it's work. It takes energy. You can't escape natural law. That was what knocked me out for a whole day. But that was a hard one. It's a lot easier, for instance, to make a bullet miss its target. It's even easier to lift the cartridge out of the chamber and put it in my pocket so that the bullet can't even be fired. Want the crown jewels of England? I could get them, Dick." I asked, "Can you see the future?" He frowned. "That's silly. This isn't How about reading minds?" Larry's expression cleared. "Oh, you're remembering some of the things I said years ago." No, I can't do that either, Dick. Maybe some day, if I keep working at this thing. Well, I can't right now. There are things I can do, though, that are just as good. Show me something you can do, I asked. He smiled. Larry was enjoying himself. I didn't begrudge it to him. He had hugged this to himself for years, from the day he found his first clue, through the decade of proving and experimenting, almost always being wrong, but always getting closer. He needed to talk about it. I think he was really glad that, at last, someone had found him out. He said, "Show you something." "Why, let's see, Dick." He looked around the room, then winked. "See that window?" I looked. It opened with a slither of wood and a rumble of sash weights. It closed again. "The radio," said Larry. There was a click, and his little set turned itself on. "Watch it." It disappeared and reappeared. "It was on top of Mount Everest," Larry said, panting a little. The plug on the radio's electric cord picked itself up and stretched toward the baseboard socket, then dropped to the floor again. "No," said Larry, and his voice was trembling. "I'll show you a hard one. Watch the radio, Dick. I'll run it without plugging it in. The electrons themselves." He was staring intently at the little set. I saw the dial light go on, flicker, and hold steady. The speaker began to make scratching noises. I stood up, right behind Larry, right over him. I used the telephone on the table beside him. I caught him right beside the ear, and he folded over without a murmur. Methodically, I hit him twice more, and then I was sure he wouldn't wake up for at least an hour. I rolled him over and put the telephone back in its cradle. I ransacked his apartment. I found it in his desk, all his notes, all the information, the secret of how to do the things he could do. I picked up the telephone and called the Washington police. When I heard the siren outside, I took out my service revolver and shot him in the throat. He was dead before they came in. For, you see, I knew Lawrence Connaught. We were friends. I would have trusted him with my life, but this was more than just a life. 23 words told how to do the things that Lawrence Connaught did. Anyone who could read could do them. Criminals, traitors, lunatics. The formula would work for anyone. Lawrence Connaught was an honest man and an idealist, I think. But what would happen to any man when he became God? Suppose you were told 23 words that would let you reach into any bank vault, peer inside any closed room, walk through any wall. Suppose pistols could not kill you. They say power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And there can be no more absolute power than the 23 words that can free a man of any jail or give him anything he wants. Larry was my friend, but I killed him in cold blood, knowing what I did, because he could not be trusted with a secret that could make him king of the world. But I can.
The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
The First Man on the Moon by Alfred Coppel, originally published in Planet Stories, Spring 1950. Narrated by Tom Trussel. John Thurman swore he'd be the first man on the moon, but he wasn't. He was only the first murderer. The ship lay at a crazy angle on the stark whiteness of the Pumice Plain. The rocket nozzles were a fused lump of slag, the fire-darkened hull crumpled and warped by the impact of landing. And there was silence. Complete and utter silence. There could be no return. Thurman realized this. At first the thought had brought panic, but, as the scope of his achievement dawned on him, the fear retreated. Bruised, giddy, half-crazed, For the certainty of death held no terrors. Not yet. And it was worth it. Fame, immortality, glory, in return for the last few years of a blighted, embittered, overshadowed life. Yes, it was well worth it. And except for the crash landing and the certainty of no return, it had all come to pass just as he had planned it for so long. On his knees he caressed the gritty soil. He lifted his arms toward the day star flaming in the day-night of space in new completion. Tears streaked his stubbled face, and strange noises came from his slack mouth. The ecstasy of success was almost unbearable. For this he had laboured a lifetime. For this he had murdered a friend. Across the abyss, the whole world waited for word. The transmitter in the rocket had survived the crash. The word would come, thought Thurman, when he was ready to send it. And sending it, he would place the official seal of immortality on his brow. The book would close, but wonderfully, satisfyingly. There would be no other to steal his rightful glory. Only Wayne could have done that, and Wayne was dead. He laughed weirdly within his helmet, so simply done. The sea of serenity stretched out before him in weird magnificence. In the far distance a mountain range rose precipitously from the wilderness of pumice to hump its spiny backbone at the brilliant stars. A limbo of black shadows and stark white tarless slopes. Moonscape. Thurman stumbled to his feet and fought the wave of nausea that surged over him as his equilibrium teetered from the low gravity. Then, in an instant, his discomfort was forgotten. Standing on the brink of the cosmos, his ego drank of grandeur. All the splendour of creation lay before him like a jewelled carpet. All his. All for John Thurman, genius, explorer, murderer. For John Thurman, first man on the moon. With an effort he dragged his eyes from the sky. Slowly his reason was returning. There was work to do. Wayne must be hidden. The next to come must never know, and it should be done quickly. Time would fly, and in the last hours the fear would return. He knew that. Right now his triumph sustained him. There was the broadcast to look forward to. 1 billion people waited for his words. It was a sop to his ego, but it could not make him forget that this was costing him his life. On occasion, Thurman could be realistic, and he knew that, when there was nothing left to do but sit and wait for the end, he would be afraid. Terribly, hideously afraid and alone. It was the only flaw in his plan for immortality. Yet, his life had been a barren thing, devoid of love or any real success. It was little enough to trade, and this was his only chance for lasting fame. He could not let it go. The plan was working, almost of its own inertia. He was alone. He was on the moon where no man had ever been before him. Not even Wayne. Wayne, who designed the rocket and guided it. Wayne, who had stolen every chance Thurman had ever had for recognition. Well, Wayne was dead now. He had never put a living foot on the soil of a moon. Only Thurman had done that, and it was his passport to eternal glory. No one could take that away from him. Weighed in the loaded balance of his mind, it more than compensated for dying alone and on an alien world. In fact, even the dying would add to the legends, and Thurman would live forever, the first man on the moon. He ran his tongue over dry lips and stooped to pick up the thing at his feet. Wayne's corpse was still bloated from internal pressures, and the naked flesh was drying fast to a parchment-like consistency. Moisture was still seeping in awful little globules from the shattered skull where Thurman's unseen blow had landed. Thurman found himself shuddering. The murder had been the hardest part, but now it was done, and all that remained was to give his dead companion a secret resting place somewhere in the vast expanse of pumice that lay out there under the blistering sun. Thurman's unsteady mind swerved from high elation to sadness. Poor Wayne. He felt he could afford to be generous now. So many years of work so soon to be forgotten. Just one quick blow, and poor Wayne slipped into the limbo of the earth's forgotten. Under the light gravity, he carried the naked, grisly bundle easily, and as he walked out into the Mare Tranquillitatis, his spirits rose again. How wonderful it was to be certain that no one could steal his triumph, not even Wayne, particularly not Wayne. He looked down at the thing in his arms and chuckled. The sound was uncanny within the Pyrex bubble of his helmet. After what seemed a long time, Thurman stopped and set down his burden. With his pack spade, he set to work digging a trench in the pumice. As he dug, he found himself crooning happily to the corpse. His voice was high-pitched and hysterical, but of course he did not notice it. There, Wayne, old friend, see, I'm making a grave for you, the very first grave, Wayne, and you shall have it, old friend, yours the grave, and mine the glory. He laughed hilariously at the thought. I'll say you didn't make it alive, you didn't, did you? But I made it, Wayne, me, alone, all alone, with no help from you, do you hear? Thurman chattered on, the sound of his crazed voice dying within the confines of his helmet, while all around him the eternal silence of the Sea of Serenity continued unbroken. The stars shone steadily in the airless sky, and the sun flamed in impotent splendour, furiously silent. At last the pit was done, and Thurman lowered the nude corpse into the shadows. "Goodbye, Wayne. You see you shouldn't have come here with me. You shouldn't have tried to steal my success. That was a wrong thing. But you're sorry now, aren't you, old friend? Don't feel too badly, Wayne. I'll join you soon. Goodbye, Wayne. Goodbye." Laboriously he shovelled the pumice into the pit and tamped it down with his leaded boots. Then he smoothed the surface of the dig until it was as smooth as the rest of the surrounding plain. Satisfied, he turned his back on the grave and started for the rocket. He sang on the way back, so happy was he to have done with his ghastly companion. Recklessly prodigal of his oxygen supply, he ran toward the open valve of the ship. Breath coming hard, he stumbled into the rocket and across the buckled deck plates for the radar phone. The tiny atomic batteries hummed as he removed the cadmium dampers. Power flickered the needles of the main set. Thurman adjusted the select to relay and tuned in his suit radio. Then he returned to sit in the open valve and call the monitoring station. He smiled with satisfaction as a response cut through the blanket of hissing solar static. "Hello? Hello, ES-1. This is White Sands. My lord, we'd given you up for lost. Where are you?" Thurman took a steadier grip on his dancing mind and replied, "Listen carefully. Carefully, you understand. This is John Thurman. I am on the westernmost edge of the Sea of Serenity on the moon. Wayne is dead. He didn't make it. Died during acceleration and I had to dispose of his body in space. Did you get that? I am alone here. The ship crashed on landing. I can't get back. But it's worth it. I haven't much time left, but I want everyone to know that I made it. It'll be easier now for others. After I've pointed the way. I'm the first, and it's worth it. Did you get that?" There was a long silence. Finally, the radarman spoke respectfully. "Yes, Thurman, we got that. Your transmission is being shunted onto the commercial bands. Can you tell us what you see up there? And Thurman, we all want you to know that our prayers are with you." Tears were flowing on Earth now, Thurman knew. Tears for a martyr to science doomed to death alone on an alien world. He smiled thinly. Even this tiny taste of deference and respect was heady wine to his frustrated psyche. Thurman stepped through the valve and lowered himself to the plane. His heart was pounding triumphantly. Carefully, painstakingly, he began to describe his surroundings, interspersing his word with scientific data. He played the hero well. There was no hysteria recognizable in his voice, and if it trembled slightly, there was reason enough for that. He rounded the bulge of the rocket's nose and looked for the first time at the western edge of the mare. In the near distance, an irregularly shaped outcropping of rock caught his eye. Transmitting as he went, he made his way toward it. He drew nearer, and as he did, fear began to stir within him. His steps faltered, but some awful power drew him on. His voice became a shrill rasp in his ears, and on earth 1 billion people gasped with horror. "Wayne!" Thurmond shouted the name in fear and threw his arm over his face, but the thing remained. It was real. "Wayne! No! It can't be! No!" But the figure did not move. The vast colossus loomed stark white and naked in the brilliant sunlight. Legs apart, arms folded on its breast, it stared with brooding eyes at the vast emptiness of the lunar plain. Thurmond howled with terror and fury. "Damn you! Damn you! Why don't you answer me? I killed you once, I'll kill you again. I'm the first one here. Do you hear me? I'll kill you again." He lowered his head and charged. The last thing he remembered was the soundless tinkle of his shattering helmet, and the terrible pain as his skull cracked under suddenly shifting pressures. And strangely enough, the story of the race's first conquest of space is the story of one man, Sargon, the Lemurian immortal, who led his people to the moon in the misty past of Earth's youth. The Lemurians are gone now, but on the westernmost edge of the Sea of Serenity there stands a statue of Sargon. It stands in magnificent isolation, a monument to the first man on the moon. Essays on Tellurian History, Quintus Bland, Geneva Keep Press, 12.50 CR.
The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Sleigh Ride by Winston K. Marks. Originally published in Planet Stories, November 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. Frayne Lewis enjoyed another sadistic shiver as he moved up the narrow passageway to the captain's control room. To his flared nostrils, the warm, moist air of the small space freighter was still heavy with the smell of death. A psychiatrist could have told him that this was a neural confusion of olfactory sensation with a perverted emotional excitement of murder. But no physicians ever attended Frayne's murders, except at inquests. 3 crewmen, still warm, lay at their posts with bloody splotches staining their tunic pockets. 2 more chores aboard, and his pay, fabulous pay, was earned. For Frayne, simple plans worked best. He rapped on the grey magnesium panel. "Your lunch, sir," he called. Inside, a solenoid thumped. The port slid aside, revealing the captain's square back outlined against the white sprinkled velvet of space. As the executive turned away from the transparent nose dome, Frayne's weapon spoke its final invitation to eternity. The captain's eyes clamped shut, and in the reduced gravity he buckled to the deck in slow motion. Then Frayne swore as the dimly lighted astropit revealed another person. What was the navigator doing up here at this time of watch? The tall, uniformed second officer reacted even as unbelieving horror swept his face. Shoving off from the bulkhead, Frayne dodged the officer's lunge with a quick sidestep, but the motion smashed the side of his curly head into a grip stanchion. His ears rang, and blood spurted from a forehead gash. In a cold rage, he watched his opponent recover and crouched for another spring. "Sucker! You could have died nice and easy. Now we shall see." With cruel deliberation, he slipped his finger off the trigger and waited for the spaceman's desperate dive. Up whipped the heavy hand weapon in a short, vicious arc that splintered jawbone with an almost crisp, wood-snapping sound. Swiftly Frayne secured the cabin door. Then he went about, binding the unconscious navigator with parts of his own uniform. When he was through, he stood for a moment, trying to orient himself in the hemispherical room. He compared it to a chart sketch provided him on Earth before he had stowed away in his special supply crate. Piracy. The word hissed into the silence with a quality of unbelieving. Frayne swung and saw that his victim had regained his senses. Yeah, piracy. Didn't think it could happen, did you? They told you space piracy was impossible, didn't they? You brutal, bestial, insane... The navigator broke off as his smashed jaw moved in spite of his gritted teeth. Not insane, buddy, just irritated. You caused me some trouble, see? I'm saving you, buddy. His hand came away from his face, palm out, and smeared with red. I'm saving you for later. He moved surely now, the details of location well in mind. A low-placed locker, when opened, spelled out the gleaming metallized spacesuit which was prop number 1 in this stage play. A little nervously, Frayne fumbled with the unfamiliar garment. The officer watched with dull eyes as the killer prepared to don it. How many men alive back there? Subtract 3. That leaves 18, doesn't it? And you can write them off as soon as I get these pajamas on. Don't spill the air. For the love of Jupiter, don't spill the air. You have the ship. Why murder us all? Orders. I didn't make 'em. I just carry them out. For money. Big money. That's why I'm here. I'm reliable. Besides, your men might break out and pester me. They're locked in their quarters. You mean you're alone? I'm your man, space boy, Frayne said with flat boastfulness. He caught up a strange webbed garment of nylon yarn. What do you call this fishnet? It was in the suit locker. You wouldn't know about that, you earthbound slug. We call it spaceman's underwear. Didn't your buddies tell you about it? Frayne shrugged, started to discard it, and changed his mind. Better put it on me, I guess. I suppose it's pretty cold when the air goes out. Through twisted, motionless lips, the navigator told him. Very cold. Absolute cold. You won't live if you spill the air. Frayne said nothing. The spaceman watched the killer strip off his clothes, slip into the net garment, and redress himself. Wool slacks snugged in at the ankles and belted tightly to a felt jacket with a tight, soft collar. Now he proceeded with the spacesuit. With enough air, a man can live for weeks in one of these. Frayne lectured to dispel a depressed feeling of confinement as he tugged the bulky space garment up and fastened it around his neck. And I got plenty of air, see? He uncoiled the length of silicon plastic hose and plugged one end into the bubble helmet, the other into the wall valve of the control cabin. How do you intend to navigate this craft? The officer asked with honest curiosity. After a moment's reflection, Frayne could see no reason to conceal the procedure. He felt like talking. He had often talked to his victims before. Foolishly, perhaps, but his victims had never lived to repeat the conversations. Nor would this one. We'll be boarded in about 20 hours. They told me they couldn't trail too closely, or your radar would have alerted you. They'll have their own crew to take over. Suppose they don't show up at all, the officer needled. They will. Don't you worry your silly little head over that. But if they don't, the prostrate man insisted. You know, when you blow the main valves, you can't close them again from the inside. You may have plenty air for that suit, but how will you eat? Breathing is just one problem in a spacesuit. They'll be here inside of 20 hours, I told you. And you'll be dead. Why? Because they double-crossed you good. Sure, they'll get the fattest cargo this can ever carried, but your share of it will be a shove outside. You'll be just as damn dead as I'll be. How did they cross me up? A ghost of a smile distorted the swollen face that had once been lean and handsome. Find out, he said simply. In spite of himself, Frayne checked back on his procedure. Purposely or otherwise, could they have left out some essential step in order to reduce the number of splits on the cargo? He ticked off the steps of his project and could find no reasonable omission. Carefully, he fitted on the bubble, opened the oxygen valve, and made the meter read what they had told him. The hiss told him he was getting gas, but surprisingly, there was no perceptible motion of air in the helmet. Clever inlet baffles prevented the chilly draughts that had plagued pioneer spacemen with head colds and sneezes. He was sweating already, but, he reflected, it wouldn't do any harm to store up a little body heat against the hours of this absolute zero they talked about. He checked the chronometer, which he'd strapped to the wrist of his suit. "Right on time," he shouted in order to be heard through the plastic bubble. His bulky hand paused clumsily on the master air outlet valve switch. He raised his other arm in a derisive farewell gesture. "Quick frozen space punks," he shouted. "Get them cheap from Frayne Lewis, wholesale triggerman." He laughed hoarsely as he jabbed the switch. The sound of air rushing from vents never intended to be opened in space screeched to a shrill requiem even through the thick curved helmet. As the sound grew fainter, his suit bulged out and threw him off balance. He toppled over and landed face down on the dying navigator. For one grisly second, the swollen, contorted face with bulging eyes glared at him. Then he rolled away in a convulsed panic that ripped his air hose from its connection. The hiss stopped, and almost instantly his rapid respiration fouled the air of his tiny headspace. Frantic, mitted hands fought the slender hose back over the nipple, struggled with the safety clamp, and once again the sweet air dribbled into his lungs. He realized now there must have been an automatic valve in the air inlet which had held his pressure until the connection was remade. With a trace of new respect for the breed of spaceman, he wondered about the poor fools who had suffered and died to provide the improvements of this self-contained bit of Earth environment. He was now the only living speck of life on the desolated craft he had betrayed to the frigid airlessness of space. Frigid. The exertion had sweat running down his face so freely that his snug neckband was soaked already. His hand came up and wrapped the bubble in an unconscious, futile motion intended to rub out the salty sweat from his stinging eyes and tortured head wound. Strange. The cold was not penetrating at all. Even at the several points where his body and limbs made contact with the distended spacesuit, no sensation of coolness struck through. His feet were moist and hot on the heavy cork soles. He stared briefly at the two bodies near his feet. They were beyond explaining anything. The smell of death came back to his nostrils. Right through his helmet? There was no smell out there. The smell was in here, with him. Power of suggestion? The navigator had said he would die. Sure, a safe statement. Nobody lived forever. But he'd lived long enough to enjoy his cut of this little deal. His cut. The officer had said it would be a shove out into space. The death smell. His own death, perhaps. He laughed softly, and the sound of his voice thudded back to his ears like the intimate murmurings of a stethoscope. It was intimate in here. Every little whisper of breath he took rustled loudly. Deliberately he cleared his throat and coughed. The sound was almost metallic. It hurt his ears. Mingled with the tepid moisture of his own breath was the faint odour of the powerful desiccant that ringed the base of the helmet. His eyes dropped to the row of tiny dials set just within eye range under his chin. Suit pressure, okay. Oxygen, okay. Humidity. The needle lay right on the red line. Well, when he stopped sweating from his scare, that should drop off. Body temperature 101. 101? 98 plus, he remembered from upper school hygiene, was normal. Over 100 was not so good. Sit down, Frayne. Relax. Get your breathing slowed down. Cool off. He took the captain's comfortable chair before the low control panel. He stared out into the incredible blackness of space, out where not the tiniest diffusion from the starlight eased the utter darkness between constellations. Somewhere in the ship's electric generation system, a moving part, brittle with the cold and contracted within its bearing, vibrated briefly and shattered. The control room twilight flared and died out into a shadowless night. Frayne had the sensation of being projected out among the stars. Loneliness pushed in on him. He realized cynically that even the two corpses had been better than this isolation. After a moment, his pupils expanded so widely that the stars seemed to grow larger, rushing in to meet the plunging spaceship. The luminous needles and dial faces of his helmet instruments became glaring little lanterns. Everything normal, except humidity, slightly over the red line, and temperature. Temperature, 102.5 Fahrenheit, he read. He wished fervently that he hadn't put on that last garment. Spaceman's underwear, it was called. Or maybe it would have been better to... An uneasy thought crept into the back of his head, and he strained his smarting eyes down at the temperature gauge. In only a minute or two, it had advanced 1/10 degree to 102.6 F. Now his breath rasped more rapidly as he gasped more oxygen. Pressure was down slightly. He moved to the valve and adjusted it. On an impulse he opened it wide for a second. The pressure needle pegged. His ears popped, but no coolness came from the baffled intake. He normalized the pressure again. The hose must be double-walled, he thought. The air should at least have had the coolness of its own expansion. He wiggled inside his sweat-sopping clothes. Why didn't the perspiration dry off and cool him? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. Where could the body moisture go? Where, for that matter, could the body heat go? Temperature, 102.9 F. Frayne Lewis was no coward, but his hands began plucking nervously at the spacesuit. The previously tough folds of shiny, impermeable fabric were now distended into a rock-like rigidity. He stood up suddenly, and his feet squished in his sandals. The sweat was a puddle up over his toes. He was getting weak and thirsty, very thirsty. He felt he must have no more water in him. He stood in a trance-like state for minutes, staring blindly into the heavens. His mind wouldn't work right. He hurt. He itched. He craved water, gallons of it. Then he stopped sweating. He had been deliberately keeping his eyes off the temperature dial, forcing his mind away from a problem he didn't understand, when he felt his face go dry. The caked streaks of salt made his skin feel stiff and itchy. Temperature, 104.3 F. Frayne now knew he was sick. At that rate of increase he couldn't last much longer. His head was buzzing, and the fantasies of fever were flashing lights across his bleared vision. He strove to fight off the hallucinations. He focused his eyes on the dim-faced chronometer and realized with a start that he had endured over 3 hours of his vigil. Perhaps it could last out. Whatever the fever was, it must ease off sometime. He staggered to the oxygen control, eased it open to full again, and watched the temperature needle for minutes. He became dazed. Then his eyes came alive again, and he stared. Temperature 104.5 F. His hands drifted listlessly to the control again. This time he throttled it down, below normal pressure. Slowly, slower than the minute hand of a watch, the needle climbed on. Why? Why? His swollen tongue licked at dry lips. He couldn't swallow any more. Around his neck a salty puddle burned a ring of itching hellfire. He choked down more on the air valve. It didn't make sense to him, but if more oxygen raised his temperature faster, then less should do the opposite. At 104.5 F, a man doesn't always think straight. At first his heart pounded loudly in protest. His breathing became quick and shallow. With sharing, grateful eyes, he watched the needle settle 1/10 of a degree and stay there. The mental relief was almost overwhelming. Had there been moisture left in his tear ducts, Frayne would have cried. But now, with the strained concentration gone, he became fuzzy. He slipped in and out of consciousness, and dead faces began drifting past his eyes. This wouldn't do. He had one more job left. He looked at his chronometer. In another 8 minutes he must throw the drive lever and kill all acceleration. The pirate ship's orbital prediction was based on this timed interruption of the freighter's drive. So much as 2 minutes off, he had been impressed, would make their search hours longer, since they were approaching from the rear at an angle. He sagged into the pilot's chair again, but sitting down was no good. Instantly the ghost faces began their parade, and the death smell, mingled with the saturated desiccant's rank stink, threatened to strangle him. The belly full of rations he had force-fed himself to sustain him the 20 hours of waiting pressed heavily against his heaving diaphragm. He gained his feet, stood with his hand on the fuel lever control, and stared fixedly at his chronometer. 2 minutes. The navigator's swollen face, eyes bulging, stared into his helmet. "Get out of my way! Got to see my watch! Get!" He brushed at the phantom as if it were a cloud of gnats. He was confident now. The temperature gauge showed his body heat to be constant at 104.4 Fahrenheit. 30 seconds now, and he could give himself over to his fever dreams. 20 seconds. The broken-jawed image persisted mistily. But now the face was repaired. It was the young, tense face before he had crushed it with his blaster. It had that hard, determined look on it. The fire in his body swept up into his brain. The bodiless image spoke softly. "You're going to die. You're going to move the fuel control the wrong way. You can't remember which way they said to move it. It isn't marked. You can't remember." "Yes, I can." The chronometer said 12 seconds. "You made one mistake. You put on your clothes over the spaceman's underwear. Your body heat can't escape. Your brain is burning up. You can't remember about the lever. You will move it the wrong way." "So what? Then I'll move it the other way," Frayne screamed. The tiny clock zeroed. Frayne pressed the lever away from him. That was the way to stop any Earth vehicle. Pressure forward on the air brake pedal. He shoved hard. The rockets roared out full blast far behind him. The building acceleration caught him and flung him stumbling back against the bulkhead. Then the firing took on complete departure blast rate. Pinned like a butterfly specimen, 8 Gs smashed Frayne Lewis's spacesuit against the metal wall. Lewis, being free inside the suit, was pressed hard against the interior of its backside. The cold he had been seeking struck through the wet felt lining and his exterior clothes. The thickly corded spaceman's underwear delayed the frost momentarily, but then the sweat froze. The death smell seized his throat. Dimly he knew what was happening, but he felt only heat. The sear of an atomic furnace burning his shoulders, buttocks, leg calves, through into his spine. The heat, the terrible sear of space cold.
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story. Wall of Crystal, Eye of Night, by Algis Budrys. Originally published in Galaxy magazine, December 1961. Narrated by Trussel. 1. Soft as the voice of a morning dove, the telephone sounded at Rufus Solinar's desk. Solinar himself was standing 50 paces away, his leonine head cocked, his hands flat in his hip pockets, watching the nighted world through the crystal wall that faced out over Manhattan Island. The window was so high that some of what he saw was dimmed by low clouds hovering over the rivers. Above him were stars. Below him the city was traced out in light and brimming with light. A falling star, an interplanetary rocket, streaked down toward Long Island facility like a scratch across the soot on the doors of hell. Solinar's eyes took it in, but he was watching the total scene, not any particular part of it. His eyes were shining. When he heard the telephone, he raised his left hand to his lips. Yes? The hand glittered with utility-gem rings. The effect was that of an attempt at the sort of copper binding that was once used to reinforce the ribbing of wooden warships. His personal receptionist's voice moved from the air near his desk to the air near his ear. Seated at the monitor board in her office, wherever in this building her office was, the receptionist told him, "Mr. Ermin says he has an appointment." "No." Solinar dropped his hand and returned to his panorama. When he had been 20 years younger, managing the modest optical factory that had provided the support of 3 generations of Solinars, he had very much wanted to be able to stand in a place like this, and feel as he imagined men felt in such circumstances. But he felt unimaginable now. To be here was one thing. To have almost lost the right and regained it at the last moment was another. Now he knew that not only could he be here today, but that tomorrow, and tomorrow, he could still be here. He had won. His gamble had given him Empervid, and Empervid would give him all. The city was not merely a prize set down before his eyes. It was a dynamic system he had proved he could manipulate. He and the city were one. It buoyed and sustained him. It supported him here in the air, with stars above and light-thickened mist below. The telephone mourned. "Mr. Ermin states he has a firm appointment." "I've never heard of him." And the left hand's utility-gems fell from Solinar's lips again. He enjoyed such toys. He raised his right hand, sheathed in insubstantial midnight blue silk, in which the silver threads of metallic wiring ran subtly toward the fingertips. He raised the hand,
and touched 2 fingers together. Music began to play behind and before him. He made contact between another combination of finger circuits, and a soft feminine laugh came from the terrace at the other side of the room, where connecting doors had opened. He moved toward it. 1 layer of translucent drapery remained across the doorway, billowing lightly in the breeze from the terrace. Through it, he saw the taboret with its candle lit, the iced wine in the stand beside it, the 2 fragile chairs, Bess Algis, slender and regal, waiting in one of them. All these, through the misty curtain, like either the beginning or the end of a dream. Mr. Ermine reminds you the appointment was made for him at the annual business dinner of the International Association of Broadcasters in 1998. Solinar completed his latest step, then stopped. He frowned down at his left hand. Is Mr. Ermine with the IAB's Special Public Relations Office? Yes, the voice said after a pause. The fingers of Solinar's right hand shrank into a cone. The connecting door closed. The girl disappeared. The music stopped. All right, you can tell Mr. Ermine to come up. Solinar went to sit behind his desk. The office door chimed. Solinar crooked a finger of his left hand, and the door opened. With another gesture, he kindled the overhead lights near the door and sat in shadow as Mr. Ermine came in. Ermine was dressed in rust-coloured garments. His figure was spare, and his hands were empty. His face was round and soft, with long dark sideburns. His scalp was bald. He stood just inside Solinar's office and said, I would like some light to see you by, Mr. Solinar. Solinar crooked his little finger. The overhead lights came to soft light all over the office. The crystal wall became a mirror, with only the strongest city lights glimmering through it. I only wanted to see you first, said Solinar. I thought perhaps we'd met before. No, Ermine said, walking across the office. It's not likely you have ever seen me. He took a card case out of his pocket and showed Solinar proper identification. I'm not a very forward person. Please sit down, Solinar said. What may I do for you? At the moment, Mr. Solinar, I'm doing something for you. Solinar sat back in his chair. Are you? Are you now? He frowned at Ermine. When I became a party to the bylaws passed at the 98 dinner, I thought a special public relations office would make a valuable asset to the organization. Consequently, I voted for it, and for the powers it was given. But I never expected to have any personal dealings with it. I barely remembered you people had carte blanche with any IAB member. Well, of course, it's been a while since 98, Ermine said. I imagine some legends have grown up around us. Industry gossip, that sort of thing. Yes. But we don't restrict ourselves to an enforcement function, Mr. Solinar. You haven't broken any bylaws, to our knowledge. Or mine. But nobody feels 100% secure. Not under these circumstances. Nor did Solinar yet relax his face into its magnificent smile. I'm sure you have found that out. I have a somewhat less ambitious older brother who's with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When I embarked on my own career, he told me I could expect everyone in the world to react like a criminal. Yes, Ermine said, paying no attention to Solinar's involuntary blink. It's one of the complicating factors in a profession like my brother's, or mine. But I am here to advise you, Mr. Solinar. Only that. In what matter, Mr. Ermine? Well, your corporation recently came into control of the patents for a new video system. I understand that this, in effect, makes your corporation the licensor for an extremely valuable sales and entertainment medium. Fantastically valuable. Empavid, Solinar agreed. Various subliminal stimuli are broadcast with and keyed to the overt subject matter. The home receiving unit contains feedback sensors which determine the viewer's reaction to these stimuli and intensify some while playing down others in order to create complete emotional rapport between the viewer and the subject matter. Empavid, in other words, is a system for orchestrating the viewer's emotions. The home unit is self-contained, semi-portable, and not significantly bulkier than the standard TV receiver. Empavid is compatible with standard TV receivers, except, of course, that the subject matter seems thin and vaguely unsatisfactory on a standard receiver. So the consumer shortly purchases an EV unit. It pleased Solinar to spell out the nature of his prize. At a very reasonable price. Quite so, Mr. Solinar. But you had several difficulties in finding potential licensees for this system among the networks. Solinar's lips pinched out. Mr. Ermine raised one finger. First, there was the matter of acquiring the patents from the original inventor, who was also approached by Courtright Burr. Yes, he was, Solinar said in a completely new voice. Competition between Mr. Burr and yourself is long-standing and intense. Quite intense, Solinar said, looking directly ahead of him at the one blank wall of the office. Burr's offices were several blocks downtown, in that direction. Well, I have no wish to enlarge on that point, Mr. Burr being an IAB member in standing as good as yours, Mr. Solinar. There was, in any case, a further difficulty in licensing EV due to the very heavy cost involved in equipping broadcasting stations and network relay equipment for this sort of transmission. Yes, there was. Ultimately, however, you succeeded. You pointed out, quite rightly, that if just one station made the change, and if just a few EV receivers were put into public places within the area served by that station, normal TV outlets could not possibly compete for advertising revenue. Yes. And so your last difficulties were resolved a few days ago, when your Empavid Unlimited, when Empavid, a subsidiary of the Solinar Corporation, became a major stockholder in the Trans-World TV network. I don't understand, Mr. Ermine, Solinar said. Why are you recounting this? Are you trying to demonstrate the power of your knowledge? All these transactions are already matters of record in the IAB confidential files, in accordance with the bylaws. Ermine held up another finger. You're forgetting. I'm only here to advise you. I have two things to say. They are: these transactions are on file with the IAB because they involve a great number of IAB members and an increasingly large amount of capital. Also, Transworld's exclusivity under the IAB bylaws will hold good only until 33% market saturation has been reached. If EV is as good as it looks, that will be quite soon. After that, under the bylaws, Transworld will be restrained from making effective defences against patent infringement by competitors. Then all of the IAB's membership and much of their capital will be involved with EV. Much of that capital is already in anticipatory motion. So a highly complex structure now ultimately depends on the integrity of the Solinar Corporation. If Solinar stock falls in value, not just you, but many IAB members will be greatly embarrassed, which is another way of saying EV must succeed. I know all that. What of it? There's no risk. I've had every related patent on Earth checked. There will be no catastrophic obsolescence of the EV system. Ermine said, There are engineers on Mars. Martian engineers. They're a dying race, but no one knows what they can still do. Solinar raised his massive head. Ermine said, Late this evening, my office learned that Courtright Burr has been in close consultation with the Martians for several weeks. They have made some sort of machine for him. He was on the flight that landed at the facility a few moments ago." Solinar's fists clenched. The lights crashed off and on, and the room wailed. From the terrace came a startled cry and a sound of smashed glass. Mr. Ermine nodded, excused himself, and left. A few moments later, Mr. Ermine stepped out at the pedestrian level of the Solinar building. He strolled through the landscaped garden and across the frothing brook toward the central walkway down the avenue. He paused at a hedge to pluck a blossom and inhale its odor. He walked away, holding it in his naked fingers. 2. Drifting slowly on the thread of his spinneret, Rufus Solinar came gliding down the wind above Courtright Burr's building. The building, like a spider, touched the ground at only the points of its legs. It held its wide, low bulk spread like a parasol over several downtown blocks. Solinar, manipulating the helium-filled plastic drifter far above him, steered himself with jets of compressed gas from plastic bottles in the drifter's structure. Only Solinar himself, in all this system, was not effectively transparent to the municipal antiplane radar, and he himself was wrapped in long, fluttering streamers of dull black metallic sheeting. To the eye, he was amorphous and non-reflective. To electronic sensors, he was a drift of static, much like a sheet of foil picked by the wind from some careless trash heap. To all of the senses of all interested parties, he was hardly there at all, and, thus, in an excellent position for murder. He fluttered against Burr's window. There was the man, crouched over his desk. What was that in his hands? A pomander? Solinar clipped his harness to the edges of the cornice, swayed out against it, his sponge-soled boots pressed to the glass. He touched his left hand to the window and described a circle. He pushed. There was a thud on the carpeting in Burr's office, and now there was no barrier to Solinar. Doubling his knees against his chest, he catapulted forward, the riot pistol in his right hand. He stumbled and fell to his knees, but the gun was up. Burr jolted up behind his desk. The little sphere of orange-gold metal, streaked with darker bronze, its surface vermicular with incrustations, was still in his hands. "Him!" Burr cried out as Solinar fired. Gasping, Solinar watched the charge strike Burr. It threw his torso backward faster than his limbs and head could follow without dangling. The choked-down pistol was nearly silent. Burr crashed backward to end, transfixed, against the wall. Pale and sick, Solinar moved to take the golden ball. He wondered where Shakespeare could have seen an example such as this, to know an old man could have so much blood in him. Burr held the prize out to him, staring with eyes distended by hydrostatic pressure, his clothing raddled, and his torso grinding its broken bones. Burr stalked away from the wall and moved as if to embrace Solinar. It was queer, but he was not dead. Shuddering, Solinar fired again. Again Burr was thrown back. The ball spun from his splayed fingers as he once more marked the wall with his body. Pomander, orange, whatever. It looked valuable. Solinar ran after the rolling ball, and Burr moved to intercept him, nearly faceless, hunched under a great invisible weight that slowly yielded as his back groaned. Solinar took a single backward step. Burr took a step toward him. The golden ball lay in a far corner. Solinar raised the pistol despairingly and fired again. Burr tripped backward on tiptoe, his arms like windmills, and fell atop the prize. Tears ran down Solinar's cheeks. He pushed one foot forward, and Burr, in his corner, lifted his head and began to gather his body for the effort of rising. Solinar retreated to the window, the pistol sledging backward against his wrist and elbow as he fired the remaining shots in the magazine. Panting, he climbed up into the window frame and clipped the harness to his body, craning to look over his shoulder, as Burr, shredded, leaking blood and worse than blood, advanced across the office. He cast off his holds on the window frame and clumsily worked the drifter controls. Far above him, volatile ballast spilled out and dispersed in the air long before it touched ground. Solinar rose, sobbing, and Burr stood in the window, his shattered hands on the edges of the cut circle, raising his distended eyes steadily to watch Solinar in flight across the enigmatic sky. Where he landed, on the roof of a building in his possession, Solinar had a disposal unit for his gun and his other trappings. He deferred for a time the question of why Burr had failed at once to die. Empty-handed, he returned uptown. He entered his office, called and told his attorneys the exact times of departure and return, and knew the question of dealing with municipal authorities were thereby resolved. That was simple enough, with no witnesses to complicate the matter. He began to wish he hadn't been so irresolute as to leave Burr without the thing he was after. Surely, if the pistol hadn't killed the man, an old man with thin limbs and spotted skin, he could have wrestled that thin-limbed, bloody old man aside, that spotted old man, and dragged himself and his prize back to the window, for all that the old man would have clung to him and clutched at his legs and fumbled for a handhold on his sombre disguise of wrappings, that broken, immortal old man. Solinar raised his hand. The great window of the city grew opaque. Bess Algis knocked softly on the door from the terrace. He would have thought she'd returned to her own apartments many hours ago. Tortuously pleased, he opened the door and smiled at her, feeling the dried tears crack on the skin of his cheeks. He took her proffered hands. "You waited for me," he sighed. "A long time for anyone as beautiful as you to wait." She smiled back at him. "Let's go out and look at the stars." "Isn't it chilly?" "I made spiced hot cider for us. We can sip it and think." He let her draw him out onto the terrace. He leaned on the parapet, his arm around her pulsing waist, his cape drawn around both their shoulders. "Bess, I won't ask if you'd stay with me no matter what the circumstances, but it might be a time will come when I couldn't bear to live in this city. What about that?" "I don't know," she answered honestly. And Courtright Burr put his hand up over the edge of the parapet between them. Solinar stared down at the straining knuckles, holding the entire weight of the man dangling against the sheer face of the building. There was a sliding, rustling noise, and the other hand came up, searched blindly for a hold, and found it, hooked over the stone. The fingers tensed and rose, their tips flattening at the pressure as Burr tried to pull his head and shoulders up to the level of the parapet. Bess breathed. "Oh, look at them! He must have torn them terribly climbing up." Then she pulled away from Solinar and stood staring at him, her hand to her mouth. "But he couldn't have climbed. We're so high." Solinar beat at the hands with the heels of his palms, using the direct, trained blows he had learned at his athletic club. Bone splintered against the stone. When the knuckles were broken, the hands instantaneously disappeared, leaving only streaks behind them. Solinar looked over the parapet. A bundle shrank from sight, silhouetted against the lights of the pedestrian level and the avenue. It contracted to a pinpoint. Then, When it reached the brook and water flew in all directions, it disappeared in a final sunburst, endowed with glory by the many lights which found momentary reflection down there. "Bess, leave me, please!" Rufus Solinar cried out. 3. Rufus Solinar paced his office, his hands held safely still in front of him, their fingers spread and rigid. The telephone sounded, and his secretary said to him, "Mr. Solinar, you are 10 minutes from being late at the TTV Executives' Ball. This is a first-class obligation." Solinar laughed. "I thought it was when I originally classified it." "Are you now planning to renege, Mr. Solinar?" the secretary inquired politely. Certainly, Solinar thought. He could as easily renege on the ball as a king could on his coronation. "Burr, you scum! What have you done to me?" he asked the air, and the telephone said, "Beg pardon?" "Tell my valet," Solinar said. "I'm going." He dismissed the phone. His hands cupped in front of his chest, a firm grip on emptiness might be stronger than any prize in a broken hand. Carrying in his chest something he refused to admit was terror, Solinar made ready for the ball. But only a few moments after the first dance set had ended, Malcolm Levier of the local TTV station executive staff looked over Solinar's shoulder and remarked, "Oh, there's Court Burr, dressed like a gallows bird." Solinar, glittering in the costume of the Medici, did not turn his head. "Is he? What would he want here?" Levier's eyebrows arched. "He holds a little stock. He has entrée, but he is late." Levier's lips quirked. "It must have taken him some time to get that make-up on." "Not in good taste, is it? Look for yourself." "Oh, I'll do better than that," Solinar said. "I'll go and talk to him a while. Excuse me, Levier." And only then did he turn around, already started on his first pace toward the man. But Courtright Burr was only a pasteboard imitation of himself as Solinar had come to know him. He stood to one side of the doorway, dressed in black and crimson robes, with black leather gauntlets on its hand, carrying a staff of weathered natural wood. His face was shadowed by a sackcloth hood, the eyes well hidden. His face was powdered grey, and some blend of livid colours hollowed his cheeks. He stood motionless as Solinar came up to him. As he had crossed the floor, each step regular, the eyes of bystanders had followed Solinar until, anticipating his course, they found Burr waiting. The noise level of the ball shrank perceptibly, for the lesser revellers who chanced to be present were sustaining it all alone. The people who really mattered here were silent and watchful. The thought was that Burr, defeated in business, had come here in some insane reproach to his adversary in this lugubrious, distasteful clothing. Why, he looked like a corpse, or worse. The question was, what would Solinar say to him? The wish was that Burr would take himself away, back to his estates or to some other city. New York was no longer for Courtright Burr. But what would Solinar say to him now, to drive him back to where he hadn't the grace to go willingly? "Courtright," Solinar said in a voice confined to the two of them. "So your Martian immortality works?" Burr said nothing. "You got that in addition, didn't you? You knew how I'd react. You knew you'd need protection. Paid the Martians to make you physically invulnerable. It's a good system. Very impressive. Who would have thought the Martians knew so much? But who here is going to pay attention to you now? Get out of town, Courtright. You passed your chance. You're dead as far as these people are concerned. All you have left is your skin. Burr reached up and surreptitiously lifted a corner of his fleshed mask, and there he was, under it. The hood retreated an inch, and the light reached his eyes. And Solinar had been wrong. Burr had less left than he thought. "Oh, no, no, Courtright," Solinar said softly. "No, you're right. I can't stand up to that." He turned and bowed to the assembled company. "Good night," he cried, and walked out of the ballroom. Someone followed him down the corridor to the elevators. Solinar did not look behind him. "I have another appointment with you now," Ermin said at his elbow. They reached the pedestrian level. Solinar said, "There's a cafe. We can talk there." "Too public, Mr. Solinar. Let's simply stroll and converse." Ermin lightly took his arm and guided him along the walkway. Solinar noticed then that Ermin was costumed so cunningly that no one could have guessed the appearance of the man. "Very well," Solinar said. "Of course." They walked together, casually. Ermin said, "Burr's driving you to your death. Is it because you tried to kill him earlier? Did you get his Martian secret?" Solinar shook his head. "You didn't get it," Ermin sighed. "That's unfortunate. I'll have to take steps." "Under the bylaws," Solinar said, "I cry laissez-faire." Ermin looked up, his eyes twinkling. "Laissez-faire? Mr. Solinar, do you have any idea how many of our members are involved in your fortunes? They will cry laissez-faire, Mr. Solinar, but clearly you persist in dragging them down with you. No, sir, Mr. Solinar. My office now forwards an immediate recommendation to the Technical Advisory Committee of the IAB that Mr. Burr probably has a system superior to yours, and that stock in Solinar Incorporated has best be disposed of." "There's a bench," Solinar said. "Let's sit down." "As you wish." Ermin moved beside Solinar to the bench, but remained standing. "What is it, Mr. Solinar?" "I want your help. You advised me on what Burr had. It's still in his office building, somewhere. You have resources. We can get it." "Laissez-faire, Mr. Solinar. I visited you in an advisory capacity. I can do no more." "For a partnership in my affairs, could you do more?" "Money?" Ermin tittered. "For me?" "Do you know the conditions of my employment?" If he had thought, Solinar would have remembered. He reached out tentatively. Ermin anticipated him. Ermin bared his left arm and sank his teeth into it. He displayed the arm. There was no quiver of pain in voice or stance. "It's not a legend, Mr. Solinar. It's quite true. We of our office must spend a year after the nerve surgery learning to walk without the feel of our feet, to handle objects without crushing them or letting them slip, or damaging ourselves. Our mundane pleasures are auditory, olfactory, and visual, easily gratified at little expense. Our dreams are totally interior, Mr. Solinar. The operation is irreversible. What would you buy for me with your money?" "What would I buy for myself?" Solinar's head sank down between his shoulders. Ermin bent over him. "Your despair is your own, Mr. Solinar. I have official business with you." He lifted Solinar's chin with a forefinger. "I judge physical interference to be unwarranted at this time, but matters must remain so that the IAB members involved with you can recover the value of their investments in EV.
Is that perfectly clear, Mr. Solinar? You are hereby enjoined under the bylaws as enforced by the Special Public Relations Office. He glanced at his watch. Notice was served at 1:27 a.m. City time. 1:27, Solinar said. City time. He sprang to his feet and raced down a companionway to the taxi level. Mr. Ermine watched him quizzically. He opened his costume, took out his omnipresent medical kit, and sprayed coagulant over the wound in his forearm. Replacing the kit, he adjusted his clothing and strolled down the same companionway Solinar had run. He raised an arm, and a taxi flitted down beside him. He showed the driver a card, and the cab lifted off with him, its lights glaring in a priority pattern far faster than Solinar's ordinary legal limit allowed. 4. Long Island facility vaulted at the stars in great kangaroo leaps of arch and cantilever span, jewelled in glass and metal as if the entire port were a mechanism for navigating interplanetary space. Rufus Solinar paced its esplanades, measuring his steps, holding his arms still, for the short time until he could board the Mars rocket. Erect and majestic, he took a place in the lounge and carefully sipped liqueur, once the liner had boosted away from Earth and coupled in its Faraday main drives. Mr. Ermine settled into the place beside him. Solinar looked over at him calmly. "I thought so." Ermine nodded. "Of course you did. But I didn't almost miss you. I was here ahead of you. I have no objection to your going to Mars, Mr. Solinar. Laissez-faire, provided I can go along." "Well," Rufus Solinar said. "Liqueur?" He gestured with his glass. Ermine shook his head. "No, thank you," he said delicately. Solinar said, "Even your tongue?" "Of course my tongue, Mr. Solinar. I taste nothing. I touch nothing." Ermine smiled. "But I feel no pressure." "All right, then," Rufus Solinar said crisply. "We have several hours to landing time. You sit and dream your interior dreams, and I'll dream mine." He faced around in his chair and folded his arms across his chest. "Mr. Solinar," Ermine said gently. "Yes?" "I am once again with you by appointment as provided under the bylaws." "State your business, Mr. Ermine." "You are not permitted to lie in an unknown grave, Mr. Solinar. Insurance policies on your life has been taken out at a high premium rate. The IAB members concerned cannot wait the statutory 7 years to have you declared dead. Do what you will, Mr. Solinar, but I must take care I witness your death. From now on, I am with you wherever you go." Solinar smiled. "I don't intend to die. Why should I die, Mr. Ermine?" "I have no idea, Mr. Solinar, but I know Courtright Burr's character, and isn't that he, seated there in the corner? The light is poor, but I think he is recognizable." Across the lounge, Burr raised his head and looked into Solinar's eyes. He raised a hand near his face, perhaps merely to signify greeting. Rufus Solinar faced front. "A worthy opponent, Mr. Solinar," Ermine said. "A persevering, unforgiving, ingenious man. And yet—" Ermine seemed a little touched by bafflement. "And yet it seems to me, Mr. Solinar, that he got you running rather easily. What did happen between you after my advisory call?" Solinar turned a terrible smile on Ermine. "I shot him to pieces. If you'd peel his face, you'd see." Ermine sighed. "Up to this moment, I had thought perhaps you might still salvage your affairs." "Pity, Mr. Ermine? Pity for the insane?" "Interest.
I can take no part in your world. Be grateful, Mr. Solinar. I am not the same gullible man I was when I signed my contract with IAB so many years ago." Solinar laughed. Then he stole a glance at Burr's corner. The ship came down at Abernathy Field in Aresia, the terrestrial city. Industrialized, prefabricated, jerry-built and clamorous, the storm-proofed buildings huddled proudly at the desert's edge. Low on the horizon was the Martian settlement, the buildings so skilfully blended with the landscape, so eroded, so much abandoned, that the uninformed eye saw nothing. Solinar had been to Mars on a tour. He had seen the natives in their nameless dwelling place, arrogant, venomous, and weak. He had been told by the paid guide they trafficked with Earthmen as much as they cared to, and kept to their place on the rim of Earth's encroachment, observing. "Tell me, Ermin," Solinar said quietly as they walked across the terminal lobby. "You're to kill me, aren't you, if I try to go on without you?" "A matter of procedure, Mr. Solinar," Ermin said evenly. "We cannot risk the investment capital of so many IAB members." Solinar sighed. "If I were any other member, how I would commend you, Mr. Ermin. Can we hire a car for ourselves, then, somewhere nearby?" "Going out to see the engineers?" Ermin asked. "Who would have thought they'd have something valuable for sale?" "I want to show them something," Solinar said. "What thing, Mr. Solinar?" They turned the corner of a corridor, with branching hallways here and there, not all of them busy. "Come here," Solinar said, nodding toward one of them. They stopped out of sight of the lobby and the main corridor. "Come on," Solinar said, "a little further." "No," Ermin said. "This is farther than I really wish. It's dark here." "Why's too late, Mr. Ermin," Solinar said, his arms flashing out. One palm impacted against Ermin's solar plexus and the other against the muscle at the side of his neck, but not hard enough to kill. Ermin collapsed, starved for oxygen, while Solinar silently cursed having been cured of murder. Then Solinar turned and ran. Behind him, Ermin's body struggled to draw breath by reflex alone. Moving as fast as he dared, Solinar walked back and reached the taxi lock, pulling a respirator from a wall rack as he went. He flagged a car and gave his destination, looking behind him. He had seen nothing of Courtright Burr since setting foot on Mars, but he knew that soon or late Burr would find him. A few moments later, Ermin got to his feet. Solinar's car was well away. Ermin shrugged and went to the local broadcasting station. He commandeered a private desk, a firearm, and immediate time on the IAB inter-office circuit to Earth. When his call acknowledgement had come back to him from his office there, he reported, "Solinar is en route to the Martian city. He wants a duplicate of Burr's device, of course, since he smashed the original when he killed Burr. I'll follow and make final disposition. The disorientation I reported previously is progressing rapidly. Almost all his responses now are inappropriate. On the flight out, he seemed to be staring at something in an empty seat. Quite often, when spoken to, he obviously hears something else entirely. I expect to catch one of the next few flights back." There was no point in waiting for comment to wend its way back from Earth. Ermin left. He went to a cab rank and paid the exorbitant fee for transportation outside Aresian city limits. Close at hand, the Martian city was like a welter of broken pots. Shards of wall and roof joined at savage angles and pointed to nothing. Underfoot, drifts of vitreous material, shaped to fit no sane configuration, and broken to fit such a mosaic as no church could contain, rocked and slid under Solinar's hurrying feet. What from Eresia had been a solid front of dun colour was here a facade of red, green, and blue splashed about centuries ago, and since then weathered only enough to show how bitter the colours once had been. The plum-coloured sky stretched over all this like a frigid membrane, and the wind blew and blew. Here and there, as he progressed, Solinar saw Martian arms and heads protruding from the rubble. Sculptures. He was moving toward the heart of the city, where some few unbroken structures persisted. At the top of a heap of shards, he turned to look behind him. There was the dust plume of his cab, returning to the city. He expected to walk back, perhaps to meet someone on the road, all alone on the Martian plain, if only Ermin would forbear from interfering. Searching the flat, thin-aired landscape, he tried to pick out the plodding dot of Courtright Burr, but not yet. He turned and ran down the untrustworthy slope. He reached the edge of the maintained area. Here the rubble was gone, the ancient walks swept, the statues kept upright on their pediments. But only broken walls suggested the fronts of the houses that had stood here, knifing their sides up through the wind-rippled sand that only constant care kept off the street. The shadow houses fenced his way, and the sculptures were motionless as hope. Ahead of him he saw the buildings of the engineers. There was no heap to climb, and looked to see if Ermin followed close behind. Sucking his respirator, he reached the building of the Martian engineers. A sounding strip ran down the door jamb. He scratched his fingernails sharply along it, and the magnified vibration, ducted through the hollow walls, rattled his plea for entrance. 5. The door opened, and Martians stood looking. They were spindly-limbed and slight, their faces framed by folds of leathery tissue. Their mouths were lipped with horn as hard as dentures, and pursed, forever ready to masticate. They were pleasant neither to look at, nor, Solinar knew, to deal with. But Courtright Burr had done it, and Solinar needed to do it. "Does anyone here speak English?" he asked. "Aye," said the central Martian, his mouth opening to the sound, closing to end the reply. "I would like to deal with you. Whenever," the Martian said, and the group at the doorway parted deliberately to let Solinar in. Before the door closed behind him, Solinar looked back, but the rubble of the abandoned sectors blocked his line of sight into the desert. "What can you offer, and what do you want?" the Martian asked. Solinar stood half-ringed by them, in a room whose corners he could not see in the uncertain light. "I offer you terrestrial currency." The English-speaking Martian, the Martian who had admitted to speaking English, turned his head slightly and spoke to his fellows. There were clacking sounds as his lips met. The others reacted variously, one of them suddenly gesturing with what seemed a disgusted flip of his arm before he turned without further word and stalked away, his shoulders looking like the shawled back of a very old and very hungry woman. "What did Burr give you?" Solinar asked. "Burr?" The Martian cocked his head. His eyes were not multifaceted, but gave that impression. "He was here, and he dealt with you, not long ago. On what basis?" "Burr. Yes, Burr gave us currency. We will take currency from you. For the same thing we gave him?" "For immortality, yes." This is a new word. Is it? For the secret of not dying?" "Not dying?" You think we have not dying for sale here? The Martian spoke to the others again. Their lips clattered. Others left, like the first one had, moving with great precision and very slow step, and no remaining tolerance for Solinar. Solinar cried out, "What did you sell him then?" The principal engineer said, "We made an entertainment device for him. A little thing, this size." Solinar cupped his hands. "You have seen it, then?" "Yes. And nothing more? That was all he bought here?" "It was all we had to sell, or give. We don't yet know whether Earthmen will give us things in exchange for currency. We'll see when we next need something from Eresia." Solinar demanded, "How did it work, this thing you sold him?" "Oh, it lets people tell stories to themselves." Solinar looked closely at the Martian. "What kind of stories?" "Any kind," the Martian said blandly. "Burr told us what he wanted. He had drawings with him of an Earthman device that used pictures on a screen and broadcast sounds to carry the details of the story told to the auditor. He stole those patents. He couldn't have used them on Earth." "And why should he? Our device needs to convey no precise details. Any mind can make its own. It only needs to be put into a situation, and from there it can do all the work. If an auditor wishes a story of contact with other sexes, for example, the projector simply makes it seem to him, the next time he is with the object of his desire, that he is getting positive feedback, that he is arousing a similar response in that object. Once that has been established for him, the auditor may then leave the machine, move about normally, conduct his life as usual, but always in accordance with the basic situation. It is, you see, in the end a means of introducing system into his view of reality. Of course, his society must understand that he is not in accord with reality, for some of what he does cannot seem rational from an outside view of him. So some care must be taken, but not much. If many such devices were to enter his society, soon the circumstances would become commonplace, and the society would surely readjust to allow for it," said the English-speaking Martian. "The machine creates any desired situation in the auditor's mind?" "Certainly. There are simple predisposing tape that can be inserted as desired. Love, adventure, cerebration. It makes no difference." Several of the bystanders clacked sounds out to each other. Solinar looked at them narrowly. It was obvious there had to be more than one English speaker among these people. "And the device you gave Burr?" he asked the engineer, neither calmly nor hopefully. "What sort of stories could its auditors tell themselves?" The Martian cocked his head again. It gave him the look of an owl at a bedroom window. "Oh, there was one situation we were particularly instructed to include. Burr said he was thinking ahead to showing it to an acquaintance of his. It was a situation of adventure, an adventure with the fearful, and it was to end in loss and bitterness." The Martian looked even more closely at Solinar. "Of course, the device does not specify details. No one but the auditor can know what fearful thing inhabits his story, or precisely how the end of it would come. You would, I believe, be Rufus Solinar." Burr spoke of you and made the noise of laughing. Solinar opened his mouth, but there was nothing to say. "You want such a device?" the Martian asked. "We've prepared several since Burr left. He spoke of machines that would manufacture them in astronomical numbers. We, of course, have done our best with our poor hands." Solinar said, "I would like to look out your door." "Pleasure."
Solinar opened the door slightly. Mr. Ermine stood in the cleared street, motionless as the shadow buildings behind him. He raised one hand in a gesture of unfelt greeting as he saw Solinar, then put it back on the stock of his rifle. Solinar closed the door and turned to the Martian. "How much currency do you want?" "Oh, all you have with you. You peoples always have a good deal with you when you travel." Solinar plunged his hands into his pockets and pulled out his billfold, his change, his keys, his jewelled radio, whatever was there. He rummaged out onto the floor, listening to the sounds of rolling coins. "I wish I had more here," he laughed. "I wish I had the amount that man out there is going to recover when he shoots me." The Martian engineer cocked his head. "But your dream is over, Mr. Solinar," he clacked dryly. "Isn't it?" "Quite so. But you to your purposes, and I to mine. Now give me one of those projectors, and set it to predispose the situation I am about to specify to you. Take however long it needs. The audience is a patient one." He laughed, and tears gathered in his eyes. Mr. Ermine waited, isolated from the cold, listening to hear whether the rifle stock was slipping out of his fingers. He had no desire to go into the Martian building after Solinar and involve third parties. All he wanted was to put Solinar's body under a dated marker with as little trouble as possible. Now and then he walked a few paces backward and forward to keep from losing muscular control at his extremities because of low skin temperature. Solinar must come out soon enough. He had no food supply with him, and though Ermine did not like the risk of engaging a man like Solinar in a starvation contest, there was no doubt that a man with no taste for fuel could outlast one with the acquired reflexes of eating. The door opened, and Solinar came out. He was carrying something, perhaps a weapon. Ermine let him come closer while he raised and carefully sighted his rifle. Solinar might have some Martian weapon, or he might not. Ermine did not particularly care. If Ermine died, he would hardly notice it. Far less than he would notice a botched ending to a job of work already soiled by Solinar's break away at the space field. If Ermine died, some other SBRO agent would be assigned almost immediately. No matter what happened, SBRO would stop Solinar before he ever reached Abernathy Field. So there was plenty of time to aim an unhurried, clean shot. Solinar was closer now. He seemed to be in a very agitated frame of mind. He held out whatever he had in his hand. It was another one of the Martian entertainment machines. Solinar seemed to be offering it as a token to Ermine. Ermine smiled. "What can you offer me, Mr. Solinar?" he said, and shot. The golden ball rolled away over the sand. "There now," Ermine said. "Now, wouldn't you sooner be me than you? And where is the thing that made the difference between us?" He shivered. He was chilly. Sand was blowing against his tender face, which had been somewhat abraded during his long wait. He stopped, transfixed. He lifted his head. Then, with a great swing of his arms, he sent the rifle whirling away. "The wind!" he sighed into the thin air. "I feel the wind!" He leapt into the air, and sand flew away from his feet as he landed. He whispered to himself, "I feel the ground!" He stared in tremblant joy at Solinar's empty body. "What have you given me?" Full of his own rebirth, he swung his head up at the sky again, and cried in the direction of the sun, "Oh, you squeezing, nibbling people who made me incorruptible and thought that was the end of me!" With love he buried Solinar, and with reverence he put up the marker.
but he had plans for what he might accomplish with the facts of this transaction and the myriad others he was privy to. A sharp bit of pottery had penetrated the sole of his shoe and gashed his foot, but he, not having seen it, hadn't felt it, nor would he see it or feel it even when he changed his stockings, for he had not noticed the wound when it was made. It didn't matter. In a few days it would heal, though not as rapidly as if it had been properly attended to. Vaguely, he heard the sound of Martians clacking behind the closed door as he hurried out of the city, full of revenge and reverence for his saviour. The End. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. And now, for the next story.
One Martian Afternoon by Tom Leahy. Originally published in If Worlds of Science Fiction, July 1953. Narrated by Tom Trussel. She was sweet, gentle, kind, a sort of Martian old Mother Hubbard, but when she went to her cupboard, the clod burst in a cloud of red sand, and the little Martian sand dog ducked quickly into his burrow. Mary Lou threw another at the aperture in the ground and then ran over, and with the inside of her foot she scraped sand into it until it was filled to the surface. She started to leave, but stopped. The little fellow might choke to death, she thought. It wasn't his fault she had to live on Mars. Satisfied that the future of something was dependent on a whim, she dug the sand from the hole. His little yellow eyes peered out at her. "Go on and live," she said magnanimously. She got up and brushed the sand from her knees and dress and walked slowly down the red road. The noon sun was relentless. Nowhere was there relief from it. Mary Lou squinted and shaded her eyes with her hand. She looked in the sky for one of those infrequent Martian rain clouds, but the deep blue was only occasionally spotted by fragile white puffs. Like the sun, they had no regard for her either. They were too concerned with moving toward the distant mountains, there to cling momentarily to the peaks and then continue on their endless route. Mary Lou dabbed the moisture from her forehead with the hem of her dress. "I know one thing," she mumbled. "When I grow up, I'll get to Earth and never come back to Mars, no matter what." She broke into a defiant, cadenced step. "And I won't care whether you and Mummy like it or not," she declared aloud, sticking out her chin at an imaginary father before her. Before she realized it, a tiny lime-washed stone house appeared not 100 yards ahead of her. That was the odd thing about the Martian midday. Something small and miles away would suddenly become large and very near as you approached it. The heat waves did it, her father had told her. "Really?" she had replied. And, "You think you know so doggone much," she had thought. "Aunt Twiley!" She broke into a run. By the Joshua trees, through the stone gateway she ran, and with a leap she lit like a young frog on the porch. "Hi, Aunt Twiley," she said breathlessly. An ancient Martian woman sat in a rocking chair in the shade of the porch. She held a bowl of purple river apples in her lap. Her papyrus-like hands moved quickly as she shaved the skin from one. In a matter of seconds it was peeled. She looked up over her bifocals at the panting Mary Lou. "Gracious child, you shouldn't run like that at this time of day," she said. "You Earth children aren't used to our Martian heat. It'll make you sick if you run too much." "I don't care. I hate Mars. Sometimes I wish I could just get good and sick so I'll get to go home." "Mary Lou, you are a little tyrant," Aunt Twiley laughed. "What you doing, Aunt Twiley?" Mary Lou asked, getting up from her frog posture and coming near the old Martian lady's chair. "Oh, peeling apples, dear. I'm going to make a cobbler this afternoon." She dropped the last apple, peeled, into the bowl. "There, done. Would you like a little cool apple juice, Marilou?" "Sure, you betcha. Hey, could I watch you make the cobbler, Aunt Twylee? Could I? Mummy can't make it for anything. It tastes like glue. Maybe, if I could see how you do it, maybe I could show her. Do you think?" "Now, Marilou, your mother must be a wonderful cook to have raised such a healthy little girl. I'm sure there's nothing she could learn from me," Aunt Twylee said as she arose. "Let's go inside and have that apple juice." The kitchen was dark and cool, and filled with the odours of the wonderful edibles the old Martian had created on and in the earth-made stove. She opened the earth-made refrigerator that stood in the corner, and withdrew an earth-made bottle filled with Martian apple juice. Marilou jumped up on the table and sat cross-legged. "Here, dear." Aunt Twylee handed her a glass of the icy liquid. Thanks," Marilou said, and gulped down half the contents. "That tastes dreamy, Aunt Twylee." The little girl watched the old Martian as she lit the oven and gathered the necessary ingredients for the cobbler. As she bent over to get a bowl from the shelf beneath Marilou's perch, her hair brushed against the child's knee. Her hair was soft, soft and white as a puppy's, soft and white like the down from a dandelion. She smiled at Marilou. She always smiled. Her pencil-thin mouth was a perpetual arc. Marilou drained the glass. "Aunt Twylee, is it true that my daddy says about the Martians?" "True? How can I say, dear? I don't know what he said." "Well, I mean that when us Earth people came, you Martians did infanticide?" Aunt Twylee interrupted, rolling the dough on the board a little flatter, a little faster. "Yeah, that's it. Killed babies," Marilou said, and took an apple from the bowl. "My daddy says you were real primitive and killed your babies for some silly religious reason. I think that's awful. How could it be religious? God couldn't like to have little babies killed." She took a big bite of the apple. The juice ran from the corners of her mouth. "Your daddy is a very intelligent man, Marilou, but is partially wrong. It is true, but not for religious reasons. It was a necessity. You must remember, dear, Mars is very arid, sterile, and able to sustain many living things. It was awful, but it was the only way we knew to control the population." Marilou looked down her button nose as she picked a brown spot from the apple. "I'll tell him he's wrong," she said. "He thinks he knows some damn much." "Marilou!" Aunt Twylee exclaimed as she looked over her glasses. "A sweet child like you shouldn't use such language." Marilou giggled and popped the remaining portion of the apple in her mouth. "Do your parents know where you are, child?" Aunt Twylee asked as she took the bowl from Marilou's hands. She began dicing the apples into a dough-lined casserole. "No, they don't," Marilou replied. She sprayed the air with little particles of apple as she talked. "Everybody's gone to the hills to look for the boys." "The boys?" Aunt Twylee stopped her work and looked at the little girl. "Yeah, Jimmy and Eddie and some of the others disappeared from the settlement this morning. The men are afraid they run off to the hills and the renegades got 'em." "Gracious!" Aunt Twylee said, her brow knitted into a crisscross of wrinkles. "Oh, I know those dopes. They're probably down the canals fishing or something." "Just the same, your mother will be frantic, dear. You should have told her where you were going." "I don't care," Marilou said with unadulterated honesty. "She'll be all right when I get home." Aunt Twylee shook her head and clucked her tongue. "Can I have another glass, please?" The old lady poured the glass full again, and then she sprinkled sugar down among the apple cubes in the casserole and covered them with a blanket of dough. She cut an uneven circle of half-moons in it and put it in the oven. "There, all ready to bake, Marilou," she sighed. "It looks real yummy, Aunt Twylee." "Well, I certainly hope it turns out good, dear," she said, wiping her forehead with her apron. She looked out the open back door. The landscape was beginning to grey as heavier clouds moved down from the mountains and pressed the afternoon heat closer, more oppressively to the ground. "My, it's getting hot. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if we didn't get a little rain this afternoon, Marilou." She turned back to the little girl. "Tell me some more about your daddy, dear. We Martians certainly owe a lot to men like your father." "Yeah, that's what he says too. He says you Martians should have died out in a few years if we hadn't come here. We're so much more civilized? Yeah. He says we were so much more civilized than you that we saved your lives when we came here with all our modern stuff." "Well, that's true enough, dear. Just look at that wonderful earth stove," Aunt Twylee said and laughed. "We wouldn't be able to bake an apple cobbler like that without it, would we?" A rumble of thunder shouldered through the crowded hot air. "Now, he says you Martians are kind of likable, but you can't be trusted. He's nuts. I like you Martians." "Thank you, child, but everyone's entitled to his own opinion. Don't judge your daddy too severely," Aunt Twylee said as she scraped spilled sugar from the table and put little bits of it on her tongue. "He says that you'd bite the hand that feeds you. He says we brought all these keen things to Mars and that if you got the chance you'd kill all of us." "Gracious," said Aunt Twylee as she speared scraps of dough with the point of a long paring knife. "He's a dope," Marilou said. Aunt Twylee opened the oven and peeked in at the cobbler. The aroma of the simmering apples rushed out and filled the room. "Could I have some cobbler when it's done?" Marilou asked, her mouth filling with saliva. "I'm afraid not, child. It's getting rather late." The thunder rumbled again, a little closer, a little louder. The old lady washed the blade of the knife in the sink. "Tell me more of what your father says, dear," she said as she adjusted the bifocals on her thin nose and ran her thumb along the length of the knife's blade. Nothing much more. He just said you'd kill us if you had the chance. That's the way the inferior races always act, he says. They want to kill the people that help them because they resent them." "Very interesting. Well, it isn't so, is it, Aunt Twylee?" The room was filled with blinding blue-white light, and the walls quaked at the sound of a monstrous thunderclap. The old Martian glanced nervously at the clock on the wall. "My, it is getting late," she said as she fondled the knife in her hands. "You Martians wouldn't do anything like that, would you?" "You want the truth, don't you, dear?" Aunt Twylee asked, smiling, as she walked to the table where Marilou sat. "Of course I do, Aunt Twylee," she said. Her scream was answered and smothered by the horrendous roar of the thunder and the piercing hiss of the rain that fell in sheets. In great volumes of water it fell, as though the heavens were attempting to wash the sins of man from the universe and into non-existent in the void beyond the void. Marilou lay beside the other children. Aunt Twylee smiled at them, closed the bedroom door, and returned to the kitchen. The storm had moved on. The thunder was the faint grumbling of a pacified old man. What water fell was a monotonous trickle from the eaves of the lime-washed stone house. Aunt Twylee washed the blood from the knife and wiped it dry on her apron. She opened the oven and took out the browned cobbler. Sweet apple juice bubbled to the surface through the half-moons and burst in delights of sugary aroma. The sun broke through the thinning edge of the thunderhead. Aunt Twylee brushed a lock of her feathery white hair from her moist cheek. "Gracious," she said, "I must tidy up a bit before the others come."
The end. Subscribe for your daily stories of futures past. If you're not subscribed, why ever not? It's free.